Welcome to another episode of Reads on the Bitcoin Well podcast channel. Spring is hitting in full force, at least here in Florida. I don't know if I can say the same for my Canadian coworkers, but it's a beautiful 80 degrees here or 26 degrees Celsius, and I can't wait to take my kids to the park this weekend and get away from the noise of the 24/7 news cycle. With things like America entering into another war, that Trump promised not to get us into, by the way, and the constant bombardment of horrible details about Jeffrey Epstein, I'll be happy this weekend to get away from the charts and markets and constant news feed and just focus on my family. Speaking of which, today's episode is all about the family, specifically about how there is a hidden war against the family in which Bitcoin stands in strong opposition. We've been raised in a society that assumes you won't have the time to raise your children yourself, that you will give them away to government institutions like school and daycares, and that you'll be so focused on the rat race of just barely paying your bills, you won't be able to have the energy or time necessary to really be there for your children. So let's look at this problem more deeply and learn how Bitcoin might just be the low time preference solution we need to break us free from this treadmill and give us back the time and presence our children and family really needs. Please email me any questions or concerns to z.adair@bitcoinwell.com. That's z.addair@bitcoinwell.com. And enjoy the show and have a great weekend. I'll see you guys next time. The Hidden War on the Family: Why Peaceful Parenting Needs Sound Money by Zach Adair. The modern family is collapsing. Birth rates are plummeting. Parents are stressed, exhausted, and absent. Children are raised by institutions rather than by their own mothers and fathers. And everyone assumes this is just how things are now, a natural consequence of modernity. Feminism, smartphones, or whatever cultural scapegoat is trending this week. But what if I told you the breakdown of the family isn't cultural at all? What if it's monetary? The thesis of this article is simple but uncomfortable. Fiat money has silently eroded the economic and moral foundations necessary for healthy child rearing. The Fiat family model, where both parents work themselves to exhaustion, children are outsourced to state institutions, and household stress leads to neglect or abuse, isn't a bug of modern life. It's a feature of inflationary currency. And Bitcoin? Bitcoin isn't just better money. Bitcoin is the champion of the family, a technology that restores the economic stability required for peaceful parenting, intergenerational wealth, and the luxury of actually raising your own children. Let me show you how we got here and how we get out. Saifedean Ammous nailed this in the Bitcoin Standard. Fiat money loses value over time. Inflation isn't a bug, it's the entire point. Your savings melt, your purchasing power erodes, the government prints, you get poorer, and the only rational response is to spend now before your money becomes worthless. This creates what economists call high time preference, a focus on immediate gratification over long-term investment. And here's the problem: raising children is the ultimate low time preference activity. You see, children don't provide an immediate return on investment. They cost money, they require time, they demand patience. You invest decades of effort with no guarantee of financial payoff. It's pure long-term thinking, delayed gratification taken to its logical extreme. But when your money melts in your hands, when inflation steals 2% or 10% or 20% of your purchasing power every year, the incentive structure flips. Why save for your children's future when saving doesn't work? Why have more kids when you can barely afford the ones you have? Why invest in their education when you're drowning in debt just to keep the lights on? Fiat money punishes the long-term thinking required to build a family. and the results are exactly what you'd expect: collapsing birth rates, fractured households, and a generation that views children as a luxury they can't afford rather than the foundation of civilization. It used to be possible for a single income to support a family. One parent worked, the other stayed home with the kids. It wasn't utopia. I mean, life was hard, but it was achievable for the average household. Not anymore. Why? Because inflation destroyed the middle class. Housing costs, education costs, and healthcare costs have exploded. But wages stayed flat. The cost of living has been inflating away from ordinary people for 50 years, and the only way to keep up is to run faster. So now both parents work, not because they want to, but because they have to. The two income household isn't a triumph of gender equality, it's a desperate response to monetary debasement. And who raises the kids while both parents are at work? Strangers, daycare workers, teachers, babysitters, screen time, the state. Anyone but the actual parents, because the actual parents are too busy earning depreciating dollars to pay for assets, home, cars, college, that are inflating away from them. This isn't freedom, this is a trap, and it's a trap built by fiat money. Here's a detail most people miss: inflation doesn't just steal your time, it steals your health. You see, the Consumer Price Index, CPI, the government's measure of inflation, hides price increases by allowing substitution. If a steak gets too expensive, they just swap it out for chicken in the calculation. If chicken gets too expensive, they swap it out for processed soy protein. The number stays the same, but the quality collapses. But affordability is only half the trap. The other half is deception. Fiat education has spent decades convincing the public that healthy food is dangerous and industrial waste is nutritious. Through state endorsed propaganda like the infamous food pyramid and corporate funded marketing, families are taught to fear nutrient dense animal fats while embracing subsidized grains and seed oils as heart healthy. People raised in government schools, trained to memorize rather than analyze, often lack the critical thinking skills to deconstruct these marketing narratives. They are not just priced out of real food, they are gaslit into rejecting it. Families feed their children industrial sludge, seed oils, high fructose corn syrup, soy based everything, not just because it's cheap, but because they've been told it's good for them. And what happens to children raised on this garbage? Obesity, ADHD, depression, anxiety. Physical and mental degeneration starts in childhood because parents can't afford the real food, and worse, they've been programmed to fear it. Fiat money doesn't just bankrupt families financially, it bankrupts them nutritionally. While economic stress is a factor, the deeper wound inflicted by fiat money is the normalization of emotional detachment. When the currency debases, it forces parents out of the home, severing the primal bond between parent and child during the most critical development years. We now have generations of adults who were raised not by their mothers and fathers, but by the fiat system itself. Shuffled between daycares, schools, and institutions, they grew up without the deep, consistent modeling of emotional regulation and peaceful conflict resolution that only a present parent can provide. Consequently, harsh parenting, yelling, coercion, and physical discipline has become the default setting of society. It persists not just because parents are stressed, but because they are repeating the patterns of detached upbringing. They normalize abuse because they never experience the alternative. The lack of peaceful parenting in society isn't just a financial symptom, it is a cultural scar. You cannot give what you did not receive. A population raised without deep familiar bonding struggles to build peaceful homes, perpetuating a cycle where authority replaces connection and obedience replaces understanding. The fiat system creates a void where love should be, and that void is filled with the trauma of disconnection. As fiat money erodes parental capacity, the state steps in as the solution. Can't afford childcare? Here's a public school system that will babysit your kids for 8 hours a day. Can't afford food? Here's food stamps, and they'll make sure your kids eat subsidized corn and soy. Can't afford health care? Here's Medicaid and a lifetime of dependency. The state positions itself as the surrogate parent, the safety net, the provider, and in so doing, it severs the bond between parent and child. The child's loyalty shifts. Instead of looking to mom and dad for guidance, security, and values, they look to the institution. This is the broken leg fallacy. The state breaks your leg with inflationary policy, then hands you a crutch and calls itself your savior. And what happens when children are raised by the state? They become loyal to the state. Public schools don't educate, they indoctrinate. They teach compliance, not critical thinking. They mirror the Fiat model: authority over truth, obedience over understanding, memorization over wisdom. Your kids aren't being raised, they're being programmed, and you're paying for it with your taxes, your time, and your sanity. And here's the worst part: children raised in high stress, neglectful, state dependent environments grow up with high time preference themselves. They never learn to delay gratification because their parents couldn't model it. They never learned financial discipline because saving didn't work. They never learned self reliance because the state was always there with a handout. So they repeat the cycle. They go into debt. They have kids they can't afford. They work themselves to exhaustion. They outsource their children to the same institutions that raised them. Fiat money creates generational trauma. And every generation, the problem gets worse. Now let's talk about the solution. Bitcoin isn't just better money. Bitcoin is a civilizational reset button for the family structure. Bitcoin is number go up technology, but more importantly, it is a savings technology that rewards patience. With a fixed supply of 21 million, no government can debase your savings or inflate away your children's inheritance. This fundamentally changes the incentive structure of your life, restoring the lost low time preference incentives. In a fiat world, inflation traps parents in a scarcity mindset, a constant state of emergency where short term survival overrides long term connection. When you are financially terrified, you react rather than respond. You choose the quick fix, coercion or yelling, over the long term solution, patience and negotiation. Adopting a Bitcoin standard breaks this cycle. It trains the brain to value the future over the present. You stop thinking in paychecks and start thinking in generations. You learn that discipline and planning yield better results than impulsive reactions. This is the missing link for peaceful parenting, the philosophy built on reason, empathy, and nonviolence. While often viewed as a luxury for the wealthy, peaceful parenting is really a triumph of low time preference. A parent with a Bitcoin mindset understands that authoritarianism is a fiat shortcut, a short term withdrawal from the relationship that leads to long term inflation of conflict. Even amidst economic struggle, the low time preference parent can pause, breathe, and choose peace, valuing the lifelong bond their child over immediate compliance. Bitcoin doesn't just fix the money in your wallet, it fixes the orientation of your mind. It empowers parents to reject the matrix of helplessness and build a family culture based on sovereignty, patience, and voluntary cooperation. As Bitcoin gains purchasing power, the cost of living, measured in sats, collapses. Think about it. If Bitcoin goes from $100,000 to 1 million over the next decade, your stack didn't just 10x, your ability to afford life increased by 10x. Rent, food, healthcare, education, all of it gets cheaper in Bitcoin terms. This means something most people have forgotten is even possible. The single income household can return. One parent works, the other stays home, not because they're stuck in some 1950s fantasy, but because they can afford to, because their savings aren't melting, because Bitcoin gave them the economic freedom to prioritize their children over their careers. And when one parent is home, The kids get raised by their actual parents, not by daycare workers, not by the state, by the people who love them most. That's not regressive, that's revolutionary. There's a deeper parallel here that's worth exploring. Bitcoin validates transactions through math, through proof of work. It doesn't rely on authority. It doesn't care who you are or what you believe. It just checks the math, and if the math is correct, the transaction is valid. Truth over authority, verification over trust. Fiat parenting, like fiat money, relies on authority. Because I said so, because I'm the parent, because those are the rules. It's top down, arbitrary, and unquestionable. Bitcoin parenting, if we can call it that, is the opposite. It's based on reason, on explaining why, on teaching children to think critically, to verify claims, and to question authority, including yours. You're not raising obedient subjects, you're raising sovereign individuals. And just like Bitcoin rejects the authority of central banks, sovereign children reject the authority of institutions that can't justify themselves with truth. This is what the state fears most: families that don't need them. Fiat money is a tool of isolation. It turns family members into economic units struggling for survival. Parents become wage slaves. Children become products of state institutions. The family fractures, and everyone blames culture, technology, or moral decay. But the problem was never culture. The problem was money. Bitcoin is a tool of connection. It allows families to opt out of the rat race, to save without being robbed, to invest in their children without watching that investment evaporate through inflation, to reclaim the time, energy, and economic security required to actually raise the next generation. The most revolutionary act a parent can take is to adopt a hard money standard. Fix the money, fix the family. Stop renting your life from the state. Stop letting inflation steal your children's future. Stop outsourcing the most important job in the world, raising your kids, to institutions that don't love them. Start stacking sats. Start thinking in generations. Start building the orange-pilled household where wealth compounds, time preference lowers, and children grow up knowing what it means to be sovereign. You cannot build a strong family on a foundation of melting ice. Bitcoin is the solid rock upon which the next generation will be built. And the next generation